2,000 years ago, a woman had a dream that haunted her for the rest of her life. She saw a man, radiant and majestic, unlike anyone she had ever seen before. Little did she know, this dream would lead her to witness one of the most significant events in human history. This woman was Claudia, wife of Pontius Pilate, and her letter about Jesus' trial and crucifixion has just been uncovered. What she wrote will make you question everything you thought you knew about that fateful day. Picture this. It's the dead of night in ancient Rome. Claudia Procula, wife of the powerful governor Pontius Pilate, jolts awake. Her heart pounds as she gasps for air, her nightgown damp with sweat. The dream she just had wasn't ordinary. It was terrifying, vivid, and felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. In her dream, Claudia saw a man unlike any other. He stood tall, radiating a divine light that both awed and frightened her. This wasn't just some random figure. It was Jesus, the man her husband was set to judge. But in her vision, the roles were reversed. Jesus wasn't the one on trial. He was the judge, presiding over all of mankind with a power that defied comprehension. The dream was so intense, so lifelike, that Claudia couldn't shake it off. As she sat up in bed, her mind raced. What could it mean? In Roman culture, dreams weren't just random nighttime imaginings. They were often seen as messages from the gods. Important people like Julius Caesar and Emperor Augustus had made crucial decisions based on their dreams. Could this be a divine warning about Jesus? Claudia's dream wasn't just scary. It was filled with symbolism that echoed ancient prophecies. The divine majesty surrounding Jesus, the sense of judgment, these elements connected to age-old visions of a Messiah, a divine figure who would come to judge the world. But how could this carpenter from Nazareth be that person? As Claudia's mind whirled, a chilling realization set in. What if this dream was a sign? What if Jesus really was more than just a troublemaker stirring up the crowds? The implications were staggering. If her dream was true, then her husband was about to make a terrible mistake. You might be wondering, what could this dream mean for Jesus' fate? Well, in Roman society, the dreams of important women weren't taken lightly. Claudia wasn't just any woman. She was the wife of the governor. Her words carried weight, even if she couldn't directly participate in politics. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, Claudia made a decision that would echo through history. She had to warn Pilate. She had to tell him about her dream, to beg him to reconsider his judgment of Jesus. The urgency she felt was overwhelming, like the fate of the world hung in the balance. But here's where things get really interesting. Claudia knew her husband. She knew the pressure he was under from both the Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities. Would he listen to her? Would he take a woman's dreams seriously when faced with the harsh realities of politics and power? As Claudia prepared to confront Pilate, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Her dream had set in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of history. But would it be enough to save Jesus? Or was his fate already sealed? Claudia's warning to Pilate echoed through time, but it wasn't the last we'd hear from her. Imagine stumbling upon a yellowed parchment tucked away in a dusty archive that bears her own account of those world-changing events. What secrets could Pontius Pilate's wife reveal about Jesus' trial that history has kept silent for 2,000 years? Picture a small library in Italy, its shelves groaning under the weight of ancient tomes and forgotten scrolls. It's here, among crumbling manuscripts and faded ink, that a discovery was made that could rewrite history as we know it. A letter, purportedly written by Claudia Procula herself, has emerged from the shadows of time. But why was this letter hidden for so long? What secrets does it hold that someone thought were too dangerous to share? The very existence of this document raises more questions than it answers. Could it be that Claudia's words were so powerful, so controversial, that they had to be kept under wraps for centuries? You might be wondering why finding a first-hand account from Pilate's wife is such a big deal. Well, let me tell you, it's huge. Most of what we know about Jesus' trial comes from male perspectives. But Claudia? She offers us something completely different. A woman's view of one of the most pivotal moments in history. And not just any woman, the wife of the man who sentenced Jesus to death. Now, let's talk about the letter itself. It's not just the words that matter, but the very material they're written on. Experts have examined every inch of this parchment, from the type of ink used to the age of the material. They're looking for clues that could prove whether this letter is the real deal or an elaborate hoax. You might be shocked to discover just how much information can be gleaned from a piece of ancient parchment. The way the ink has faded, the texture of the material, even the smallest imperfections can tell us when and where it was written. It's like a time capsule, preserving not just Claudia's words, but a piece of the world she lived in. But here's where it gets really interesting. What shocking revelations might this letter contain? Could Claudia's words change everything we thought we knew about Jesus' trial? Maybe she saw something no one else did. Maybe she heard conversations that were never meant to be recorded. The possibilities are mind-boggling. One thing's for sure, this letter gives us a unique female perspective on Jesus' trial. In a world dominated by men, Claudia's voice stands out. She wasn't just an observer. She was right in the thick of it. Her husband held Jesus' fate in his hands. And now, through her words, we might finally understand what really happened in those tense moments before the crucifixion. Are you ready to dive into the contents of this extraordinary document? Let's discover together what Claudia Procula, the woman who dreamed of Jesus, had to say about the man who would change the world forever. Her words might just make you question everything you thought you knew about that fateful day in Jerusalem. Close your eyes and picture Jesus through the eyes of a Roman noblewoman. What do you see? The image in your mind might be about to change dramatically. Claudia Procula's letter gives us a first-hand account of Jesus that's so vivid, so unexpected, it might make you question everything you thought you knew about his appearance. Imagine Claudia, wife of Pontius Pilate, catching her first glimpse of Jesus in the bustling streets of Jerusalem. She describes a man of unequaled beauty with a radiant forehead. This isn't the humble carpenter we often picture. This is someone who stood out in a crowd, someone who caught the eye of a woman used to the grandeur of Rome. But here's where things get really interesting. Claudia's description challenges many common depictions of Jesus we see today. She talks about his hair falling in locks on his shoulders in the manner of the Nazarene. This specific hairstyle might be very different from the short, neatly trimmed Jesus we often see in paintings and movies. Can you picture it? Long, flowing locks that set him apart from both the Roman and Jewish men around him. Now let's talk about those eyes. Claudia writes that Jesus' gaze was so intense, it seemed capable of turning us into dust. Imagine meeting someone with eyes like that, eyes that could inspire both admiration and fear. It's no wonder Claudia was so affected by her encounter with Jesus. You might be wondering how Claudia's account compares to other historical descriptions of Jesus. Well, here's the shocking part. It aligns surprisingly well with them. Pilate's own letter to Emperor Tiberius also describes Jesus as a remarkable figure, reinforcing the idea that there was something truly special about his presence. But what made Jesus stand out so much to Claudia? Remember, she was a Roman noblewoman, used to seeing powerful men in elaborate clothing. Yet Jesus, in his simple tunic, captured her attention more than any Roman senator or general ever had. It wasn't just his physical beauty, it was an aura, a presence that she struggled to put into words. Here's where things get even more intriguing. Claudia's description of Jesus matches perfectly with her husband's account. Pilate, in his letter to Emperor Tiberius, also portrays Jesus as an extraordinary figure. Two very different people, from very different backgrounds, both struck by the same man. Could this be proof that there really was something divine about Jesus? But Claudia saw more than just Jesus' appearance. Her letter goes on to describe something that would shake her world to its very core. Are you ready to discover what happened next? Because what Claudia witnessed might just change the way you think about miracles forever. What would it take to make a skeptical Roman believe in miracles? For Claudia Procula, it was witnessing something so extraordinary. It shattered her entire worldview in an instant. The wife of Pontius Pilate was about to see an event that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the world and the limits of human power. Picture this. Claudia, a woman accustomed to the grandeur of Rome, finds herself in the presence of Jesus. She's already been struck by his appearance, but what happens next will leave her utterly speechless. In her letter, Claudia recounts a miracle so profound, it's hard to believe even as you read it. Jesus is approached by a distraught mother, cradling the lifeless body of her young daughter, Samida. The crowd parts, the air thick with tension and sorrow. Claudia watches, her heart racing, as Jesus gently takes the child's hand. What happens next is nothing short of extraordinary. With a voice that seems to resonate through the very fabric of reality, Jesus speaks to the girl. "Samida," he calls, "arise." In that moment, Claudia swears she can feel the world hold its breath. And then, before her very eyes, the impossible happens. The girl's chest rises, her eyes flutter open. She sits up, alive and well, as if waking from a deep sleep. Can you imagine witnessing such a thing? For Claudia, it was like watching the laws of nature bend before her very eyes. This wasn't some parlor trick or clever illusion. This was life, springing forth from death itself. But the miracle doesn't end there. Claudia describes the scene that follows in vivid detail. The mother, overcome with joy, embraces her daughter. The crowd erupts in a mixture of awe, fear, and jubilation. And Jesus? He stands there, radiating a power and majesty that Claudia struggles to put into words. You might be wondering why this particular miracle was so significant. Well, in the context of Jesus' ministry, raising the dead was considered one of the most powerful signs of divine authority. It wasn't just about healing the sick or feeding the hungry. This was about having power over death itself, a power that, in the minds of both Jews and Romans, belonged only to the gods. For Claudia, this event was a turning point. Remember, she came from a world where the gods were distant, often capricious figures. But here was Jesus, performing an act of divine power with compassion and love. It challenged everything she thought she knew about the relationship between gods and mortals. How do you think this miracle affected Claudia's view of Jesus? Well, her letter makes it clear. In that moment, she became convinced of Jesus' divine nature. This wasn't just a charismatic teacher or a skilled healer. This was someone with power beyond human comprehension. Claudia's words paint a picture of a woman forever changed by what she witnessed. The skeptical Roman noblewoman was gone, replaced by someone who had seen the impossible made possible. Her letter vibrates with the awe and reverence she felt in that moment, a feeling that would stay with her for the rest of her life. But here's where things get really interesting. While Claudia was convinced of Jesus' divine nature, not everyone saw him the same way. In fact, the very miracle that opened Claudia's eyes would fuel the growing tensions in Jerusalem. How could such an extraordinary act be met with anything but universal acclaim? Well, that's where our story takes an unexpected turn. As Claudia's awe turned to concern, she found herself witnessing a spectacle unlike any other. Picture this: a city divided, its streets a battleground of faith and fear. How could the same man inspire both devoted followers and deadly enemies? The answer lies in a powder keg of politics and prophecy that was about to explode. Jerusalem was no stranger to tension, but the atmosphere during Jesus' trial was unlike anything Claudia had ever seen. The city was split right down the middle. On one side, crowds of people who believed Jesus was the long-awaited Messiah. They followed him everywhere, hanging on his every word, desperate for a glimpse of the man who could raise the dead. On the other side, powerful religious leaders and their supporters, who saw Jesus as a threat to everything they held dear. You might think that raising the dead would be enough to convince an entire city. But in Jerusalem, it only fueled the fire. Claudia describes the noise of the crowd as resembling the roar of the waves of the sea. Can you imagine it? The shouting, the arguments, the passionate debates echoing through the narrow streets. It was a storm of human emotion, with Jesus at its center. But why was the city so divided? To understand, we need to look at the powder keg of tensions that had been building for years. The Jewish people had long chafed under Roman rule. They were waiting for a savior, someone to free them from foreign oppression. When Jesus came along, performing miracles and speaking of a new kingdom, many thought their prayers had been answered. However, the religious leaders saw things differently. Jesus challenged their authority, questioned their traditions, and gathered a following that threatened their power. To them, he wasn't a savior. He was a dangerous rebel who needed to be stopped. Now imagine being Pontius Pilate in the middle of all this. Claudia's letter reveals the intense pressure her husband faced from all sides. The religious leaders were demanding Jesus' death, stirring up the crowds. But executing an innocent man, especially one with so many followers, could spark a rebellion. It was a political nightmare. You might be wondering, how could Pilate possibly navigate this explosive situation? Claudia's account shows us a man torn between his duty to keep the peace and his growing suspicion that Jesus was no ordinary criminal. Her words paint a picture of a leader caught in an impossible position, with the fate of a city, and perhaps the world, hanging in the balance. As the crowds grew louder and more demanding, Claudia watched her husband struggle with the weight of his decision. The pressure was immense. One wrong move could plunge the entire city into chaos. Yet amidst all this turmoil, one figure remained surprisingly calm. And that's where our story takes an unexpected turn. While Jesus stood serenely before his accusers, Pontius Pilate found himself trapped in a political nightmare. As governor of Judea, he was used to making tough decisions, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Claudia's letter peels back the curtain on Pilate's private anguish, revealing a man caught between duty and conscience. What she witnessed next would shock even the most hardened cynic. Imagine being in Pilate's position. On one side, you have your wife's urgent warning about Jesus. On the other, a crowd demanding blood. Claudia's letter reveals that Pilate was deeply troubled by the prospect of condemning Jesus. He recognized him as a wise man and feared the consequences of spilling innocent blood. It's a side of Pilate we rarely see, a man wrestling with his conscience in the face of immense pressure. But Pilate wasn't just dealing with a moral dilemma. The political stakes were enormous. If he released Jesus, he risked inciting a rebellion that could threaten his position as governor. The Jewish leaders were pushing hard for Jesus' execution, and defying them could spark chaos across Judea. Can you picture Pilate pacing in his chambers, torn between his wife's plea and the demands of his office? Claudia's account shows us a Pilate desperately trying to find a way out. He attempted to pass Jesus off to King Herod, hoping to wash his hands of the whole affair. When that failed, he offered to release a prisoner, as was customary during Passover, giving the crowd a choice between Jesus and a known criminal. Each time, Pilate's efforts were thwarted by the relentless crowd and the cunning of the religious leaders. You might be wondering, will Pilate listen to his wife's warning or cave to public pressure? The tension in Jerusalem was reaching a boiling point. Every moment Pilate hesitated, the crowd grew more restless. Claudia describes the scene with vivid detail, painting a picture of a man running out of options and time. What Claudia reveals next might change how you view Pontius Pilate forever. Her letter shows a more sympathetic side of the man history often paints as a heartless villain. She describes Pilate's genuine struggle, his attempts to find justice in an impossible situation. It's a portrait of a man who recognized Jesus' innocence, but felt powerless to save him. In the end, we know what choice Pilate made. But Claudia's account adds layers of complexity to that decision. It wasn't a simple matter of cowardice or indifference. It was a man caught in the gears of history, forced to make an impossible choice with consequences that would echo through the ages. But Claudia's involvement in this world-changing event didn't end with her warning to Pilate. What she witnessed next would shake her to her very core and set her on a path she never could have imagined. Are you ready to discover how this Roman noblewoman's life was forever changed by her encounter with Jesus? We've seen Claudia's desperate attempt to save Jesus, but what happened to her after she failed? Her letter paints a vivid picture of a woman tormented by guilt and fear. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerges, one that could change everything. Imagine the weight of knowing you couldn't prevent an innocent man's death. That's exactly what Claudia faced in the aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion. Her letter reveals a soul in turmoil, grappling with overwhelming guilt. She writes of sleepless nights, haunted by visions of Jesus on the cross. The dream that once warned her now seemed to mock her failure. But Claudia's emotional journey didn't end with guilt. As she witnessed the strange events following the crucifixion, her fear grew. She describes darkness falling over Jerusalem at midday, an earthquake that shook the very foundations of the city, and reports of the temple veil mysteriously tearing in two. These weren't just odd occurrences. They were signs that shook Claudia to her core. You might think these experiences would drive Claudia further into despair, but something unexpected happened. As she reflected on Jesus' words and actions, a seed of belief began to grow. The man she had tried to save was becoming more than just an innocent victim in her eyes. Could he truly be who he claimed to be? Claudia's letter takes us on a journey through her evolving worldview. She writes of secretly seeking out Jesus' followers, listening to their stories of his teachings and miracles. With each encounter, her understanding of the world and her place in it began to shift. The gods of Rome seemed distant and cold compared to the loving Father Jesus spoke of. But here's where things get really interesting. As Claudia's faith grew, so did her awareness of the danger it posed. Being the wife of a Roman governor came with expectations. Converting to this new faith could mean losing everything: her status, her safety, maybe even her life. Can you imagine the tension she must have felt, torn between her newfound beliefs and the world she had always known? Despite the risks, Claudia's letter suggests she became a secret follower of Jesus. She writes of discreetly helping his disciples, using her position to protect them when she could. It's a picture of a woman living a double life. Outwardly, the Roman noblewoman. Inwardly, a devoted believer in a faith that was turning the world upside down. Claudia's transformation is nothing short of remarkable. From skeptical observer to guilt-ridden bystander to secret disciple, her journey mirrors the tumultuous spread of early Christianity. But as we marvel at her story, a question begins to nag. Is this letter too good to be true? The details in Claudia's account are vivid and compelling. They align with other historical records and fill in gaps in the biblical narrative. But could this extraordinary document really have remained hidden for so long? As we dig deeper into the letter's authenticity, you might be surprised by what we uncover. Are you ready to separate fact from fiction in one of history's most intriguing documents? Claudia's letter seems to offer a missing piece of history. But here's the twist. What if that piece fits a little too neatly? As we examine the evidence, you'll discover why this document has divided historians and could change our understanding of early Christianity. The debate surrounding Claudia's letter is intense. Some experts are convinced it's the real deal, a genuine voice from the past that sheds new light on Jesus' trial. Others think it's too good to be true, a clever forgery designed to fill in the gaps of history. You might be surprised to learn just how heated this argument has become in academic circles. So what makes some scholars believe the letter is authentic? For starters, the level of detail in Claudia's account is astounding. She describes events and emotions in a way that feels incredibly personal and vivid. The letter also aligns with other historical records from the time, including her husband's own account. It's as if we're getting a behind-the-scenes look at one of history's most pivotal moments. But the skeptics have their reasons too. They point out that the letter seems to fit our modern understanding of Jesus' trial a little too perfectly. It's almost as if someone wrote it to fill in all the gaps we've always wondered about. Plus, the fact that it remained hidden for so long raises some eyebrows. How could such an important document have escaped notice for centuries? You might be wondering how experts even begin to analyze something like this. Well, it's a fascinating process. They start with paleography. That's the study of ancient handwriting. By examining the style of the writing and the materials used, they can often determine when and where a document was created. They also look at the language used, checking if it matches what we know about how people wrote during that time. But that's just the beginning. Historians also dive deep into the content, comparing it with other known facts about the period. They ask questions like, does this align with what we know about Roman culture at the time? Are there any anachronisms, things mentioned that shouldn't exist yet? It's like being a detective, but instead of solving a crime, you're unraveling the mysteries of history. Here's where things get really interesting. Some of the most compelling evidence for the letter's authenticity comes from what it doesn't say. There are details about Roman life and culture that a modern forger might not know to include. Plus, the emotional depth of Claudia's account, her guilt, her fear, her growing faith, feels incredibly genuine. It's hard to fake that kind of raw emotion. But even if the letter turns out to be a clever forgery, does that mean it's worthless? Not at all. Many experts argue that it still provides valuable insights into how people have understood and interpreted the events surrounding Jesus' trial over the centuries. It's a window into our collective imagination and our desire to fill in the gaps of history. As we wrap up our investigation into Claudia's letter, you might find yourself with more questions than answers. But isn't that the beauty of history? It's always evolving, always challenging us to look deeper. And who knows? Maybe, someday, we'll uncover even more evidence that will finally put this debate to rest. Until then, Claudia's words continue to captivate our imaginations and spark our curiosity about one of history's most pivotal moments. Just when you thought the story of Claudia's letter couldn't get any more fascinating, we're about to explore its most profound impact. This isn't just about historical facts anymore. We're talking about a document that could fundamentally change how millions of people understand their faith. What if everything you thought you knew about early Christianity was about to be turned upside down? Claudia's letter has sent shockwaves through both historical and religious communities. It challenges the traditional narratives we've all heard about Jesus' trial in ways that are both exciting and unsettling. Imagine discovering a missing puzzle piece that suddenly makes the whole picture look different. That's what this letter has done for our understanding of one of history's most pivotal moments. You might be wondering how a single letter could have such a huge impact. Well, it's all about the details. Claudia's account fills in gaps that the biblical stories leave open. It gives us a behind-the-scenes look at the political pressures Pilate faced, the way Jesus appeared to those around him, and the immediate aftermath of the crucifixion These aren't just minor details. They're game changers that force us to rethink everything we thought we knew about those crucial days in Jerusalem. But here's where things get really interesting. Different faith traditions have responded to Claudia's letter in wildly different ways. Some see it as a valuable historical document that complements the biblical texts, adding depth and nuance to the story they've always known. Others view it with suspicion, worried that it might contradict or undermine their long-held beliefs. The debates this letter has sparked in religious communities are intense, to say the least. You might be shocked to discover how this letter emphasizes the role of women in early Christianity. Claudia's perspective offers a rare female voice from a time when women's experiences were often overlooked or ignored. Her account highlights the moral dilemmas she faced and the isolation she felt as a woman caught up in these world-changing events. It's a reminder that history is always more complex and nuanced than we might think. Now let's consider the big question. Could this letter reshape our entire view of early Christianity? The answer might surprise you. Whether you believe the letter is authentic or not, its impact is undeniable. It's forcing scholars, religious leaders, and everyday believers to re-examine their assumptions about Jesus, his trial, and the birth of the Christian faith. Even if Claudia's letter turns out to be a clever forgery, it still provides incredibly valuable insights. It reflects how people have understood and interpreted the events surrounding Jesus' trial over the centuries. It's a window into our collective imagination and our deep desire to know more about one of history's most significant moments. As we wrap up our exploration of Claudia's letter, you might find yourself with more questions than answers. But isn't that the beauty of history and faith? They're always evolving, always challenging us to look deeper and think harder. Who knows what other hidden letters or artifacts might be out there, waiting to rewrite history once again. The story of Jesus and the birth of Christianity continues to captivate us 2,000 years later. And thanks to discoveries like Claudia's letter, it seems the story is far from over. As we wrap up our journey through Claudia's remarkable letter, we're left with a tantalizing glimpse into one of history's most pivotal moments. This ancient document, whether genuine or not, forces us to question everything we thought we knew about Jesus' trial. It's like finding a missing piece to a puzzle we've been trying to solve for centuries. But here's the thing that might really blow your mind. What if Claudia's letter is just the tip of the iceberg? Imagine the secrets still hidden in dusty archives or buried beneath ancient ruins. How many other letters are out there, waiting to be discovered? Each one could rewrite history as we know it. You might be wondering, what does this mean for my faith? Well, that's the beauty of it. Claudia's letter challenges us to dig deeper, to question our assumptions, and to see the birth of Christianity through fresh eyes. It's a reminder that history is always more complex and fascinating than we ever imagined. Who knows what other revelations are waiting just around the corner?